everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença, and today we're going to learn how to build our first project using JavaScript and HTML, okay? So the problem that we're going to do today, we're going to create a web page, okay? And in this web page, we're going to have some functions. I'm going to show you the web page that I already created in here. Let me put here cd JavaScript and HTTP server. Let me just show you what's going to be our project in the end. So let me click in here. So we're going to create a page, okay, where this is the default case. So when we click on welcome, we're going to have this hello here, hello you, with a heading in yellow. If we click in red, our background is going to be red and we're not going to have any message in here. If we click green, our background is going to be green and nothing written. And when we click blue, it's going to become the background all blue, okay? So this is what we're going to do, right? So let's start our project. Let me close the terminal here, cd and cd hello app, okay? So let's start. We're going to start our project using creating the HTML, okay? So I already created here a file called index.html, and we're going to do the first part, the HTML. So we already have some videos explaining how to use the HTML, okay? So I highly recommend you to take a look on Learn HTML in a couple of hours. There we explain a lot about the tags and all the syntax that you have to use when you're using HTML, okay? So here I'm going to explain some steps, but if you want to understand better the HTML, go to that video, okay? So the first thing that we have to do when we are creating an HTML file, we have to do this doc type here, HTML, okay? And we have to open and close our tag explaining that we're going to create a page in HTML with language English, okay? So this is a convention way that we have to use when we are creating a file of HTML. The next step is what? We have two parts in our HTML that it's called the head and the body. The head is going to have the information that it's not visual for us in the project. Okay, and the body, it's the part visual, that the things that we're going to display. So here we're going to create the head tag, okay, and we have the body tag, okay. And in the HTML, we have to always open and close tags, and we have to respect the indentation. So for example, everything that is inside this HTML tag here is the things that we're going to show in our HTML file. Everything that is inside this head tag here is the part that it's non-visual, and everything inside the body tag here is the part that it's visual, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is what? We're going to create a title in the tab for our project. So we're going to create the title tag, okay? And here I'm going to write first project because it's our first project. I'm just going to run here HTTP server, okay? When we want to run the server to check our project, we write HTTP server and we click here and it's going to open. So by now our web page has what? Has nothing, because we didn't write anything on the body tag. We just wrote here the title tag, and what this title tag does, creates a name for our tab here. So we have our tab here as first project. If we don't have this tag, what we would have? So let me refresh here, and we would have any title in our tab, okay? That's why we are creating here the title tag. And when we click create, now we have our first project name of our tab, okay? So now that we did the head part, we're going to work with the body. So I don't know if you remember the website that I created. We have what? We have buttons, okay? And we have a heading, right? That is the hello you. So first, let's create the buttons, okay? So I'm going to create here button. It's the button thing. And the first one was the message welcome, welcome. This is the first button. The second button was red, okay. The third button was with the message of green, and the last button has message blue, okay. So what was happening? Let's save here and check how it's our project. So when we run here, we're seeing the 4 buttons, right? So we have the button welcome, the button red, the button green, and the button blue. If we click in here, nothing happens because we're not specifying what should happen in our buttons, okay? And how can we create this? We're going to create this, we're going to explain to the code what this button is going to do in the JavaScript file, okay? And as you can see, we also had the h1, okay? So after the buttons, we have an h1 tag saying what? Saying hello you, okay? So if you wanna remember how was the page in the how it's going to be our project at the end, go to the beginning of the video that I showed to you. So by now we have this. We have the welcome, the red, the green, and the blue, okay, and the hello you. That's the default case of our HTML. And now that we've done this, let's work with the JavaScript, right? So let's code now the JavaScript file to explain what each button is going to do when we click on it, okay? So to do this, what should we do? We can write our JavaScript inside our HTML file, but just to make things more clear, I'm going to create here an index.js. So this is the file. .js means that it's a JavaScript. So we're going to create here a file index.js to write our JavaScript code, okay? And in order to make the compiler understand that we're going to use the index.js, we have to write here on the head part. We have to write this tag here, script, okay? And what we're going to have on the script, we're going to put here src, that it's the source, index.js, okay? If we don't write this part here, we're not able to use the information that we have in the index.js, okay? That's why we have to use this script tag and explain in which file our JavaScript file is in there. And our JavaScript is in the file index.js. That's why we write here source equals index.js. Okay, so far so good. I hope you are understanding what our project by now, okay? So let's do the JavaScript. I know it's going to seem a little bit confusing, but let's do our first part. So let's start saying an alert. So alert, hi, just to check if our project is running okay. So here let's do the refresh. And we receive here an alert, hi, okay, because we passed this alert hi here, so the JavaScript is working in our project, right? So we're checking using this alert if this script here is working. It's has a relationship between this HTML and this index.js. So since we have here this alert, it means that it's working. So for example, if we take out this tag here and we refresh here, we're not receiving the alert here, right? Why? Because we're not having this relation between index.html and index.js. So that's why we have to use the script here. So let's refresh again, and we're going to receive here an alert, okay? So you check that we're receiving an alert before the page renders, right? So we're receiving an alert and takes a while to the page refreshes, and then we have our page in here. So we have to fix this, okay? And we're going to understand with the time. So let's start writing our code. We're going to start writing our code doing what? We're going to start understanding what is the query selector here. So we have this query selector method. This is a method from JavaScript that we're going to get the the query selector method returns the first element that matches a specified CSS selector in the document. So let's see an example. So we have here an H2, one paragraph, and we have what in here? Click the button to add a background color to the first element in the document with class example. So here the H2 and the P tag has class example, okay? And when we click here, they change the background to red, okay? Because we click on the button. So the query selector is going to do what? It's going to select the element in our HTML. It's going to grab the information in the HTML that we're going to use in here. So I'm going to show you on using the developers tool. So you can go in here, developer tools. This is something that we have, okay, in Google Chrome, for example. And if we put here, so document.query selector, okay, this is the console. The console is one thing that we can do to check the information that we have in our page, and then we can understand better what's happening. So let's grab the query selector H1. And since we know that the query selector method here returns us the element that matches with the name that we put inside the parentheses, when we put here query selector H1, so what appears to us? This part here, right? So when we have this here, it's showing what? It's showing the H1. And the H1 is this hello you that we wrote before. So if we check here, the H1 tag is this hello you. And when we put here on the console, what's the H1? It's the same thing that is appearing here, right? It's this H1 tag here. So when we use the query selector, we're grabbing the information that we have here on the project. Or for example, if we put document.query selector and button, let's check what happened. So here it appears button and showing the first button, for example, that it's the welcome. And we have other 3 buttons in here, okay? But the default case here is going to grab the first button. So as we can see here, it's grabbing just the button welcome, but we want to work with the button red, green, and blue. And how are we going to do this? We're going to create an ID here to explain. It's like when we are giving a name for the button. So we have the button welcome, and we're going to create a name for this button as what? So the ID is going to be welcome, okay. I'm going to create another ID for the red, and it's going to call red. ID equals to green, and the other ID of the button will be ID equals to blue. Why? Because as we saw here in the console, when we use query selector, so in this example here, we use query selector H1. We're grabbing the H1, since we just have one H1 tag, that is this hello you, that is being displayed on the page. We're going to grab just this information. But when we use query selector button, it's just grabbing one button, but we have 4 buttons. That's why we use this ID here, because the ID is going to what? It's going to give a name for each button. It's like to give a name for each button. So if you want to call this button Giovanna, the other Rodrigo, and you can change the name. I'm just using welcome red, green, and blue to make our life easier, okay? So let's run this again and let's check what's happening. So it's receiving the alert here, okay? And we're going to do the query selector. So document.query selector. And now instead of button, let's try to give the ID of the button red, for example. And when we are grabbing an ID, we have to use the single quotation marks, the hash, and we have to put the name, okay? And it's going to give to us what? So in here it's not giving to us anything. Let me check why. It should give to us this. Let me check again. So let's do here a hard code. I forgot to save here. That's the problem why we're not grabbing. So let me refresh here. Okay, perfect. Now let's do the query select. This is good because you're learning that it's always good to save the project. That's why if we didn't save the file, we're not ready to see in here. Okay, so query selector. So as I was saying, we want to grab the red button, okay? And how are we going to grab the red button? We're going to call by his name, that it's ID red, right? So when we are calling the name as ID, we're going to use a hash before the name, okay? To explain that this is an ID. So as we can see here, when we use query selector hash red, we're grabbing the button with ID red here, okay, that we wrote. If we want to grab the other buttons, we're going to do the same, query selector, and let's grab the button with ID green. So remember, open the single quotation mark, hash green, that is the name of our button in green, and now it's showing up what? The button in green, okay? And now we can do the same with the others. So query selector, here hash blue, and it's going to show us what? The last button that we have in here, right? So that's what's showing up to us. And we also can do document.query selector. And what's the name of our button welcome? It's welcome, right? So let's call here hash welcome. And now it's showing to us the button welcome. So the console is a powerful tool for us to check if the things that we can use in JavaScript before we actually use in the file. We can check here if our idea makes sense, okay? So now that we understand that the query selector grabs the value of the thing that we put here in the parentheses, so it can be an ID, or as we saw before, it can be what? Query selector, or it can be the tag itself of the file. So for example, h1 here, we already saw, we put here h1, and it's going to give us what? The tag h1. And we can also grab the tag body, right? So query selector, and if we put here body, what is going to return to us? Everything that we wrote on the body, that it's these buttons with the h1, that it's everything that we wrote on the body of the HTML. So the query selector basically do what? I think you already understand, but I think I'm being repetitive, but I think it's important to be repetitive. So the query selector is going to grab the information in the HTML in order to use in here in the index.js, okay? So now that we understand the query selector, let's do this. So let's get the parameters in the HTML. And which parameters we're going to get? We're going to get the document.query selector h1, okay? But we have to store this in a variable. And how do we store things in a variable? We can use the let. The let is we're defining a data type for our variable, okay? And we can give a name for this, and I'm going to call h1, okay? So let h1 is going to store this in here. And if we want to check if we're grabbing the right thing, we can use console.log and put here h1. And let's check our console to check what's happening. So let's do here refresh. And it should appear here a console.log of our information. And we're seeing that it's not appearing. So we have a problem here. So what is this problem? The problem is that our index.js file is running before the page loads, okay? So there is a way to prevent this. So if we see here, there is cannot access h1 before initialization. So what this means for us? This means that our index file, it's running before the index.html works. So when we call the index file, it's not, he doesn't understand the h1. So we're having a problem. How do we fix this? We fix using the add event listener method. So the add event listener attaches an event handler to the specific element. And what's the event element in this case? We have to prevent our index.js to run before the index.html. We want this to run after the index.html works. So what do we want? We want the JavaScript file works after the HTML appear here in our page. And how are we going to fix? We're going to fix using one thing that is called this add event listener. So we're going to call documents.add event listener, okay? So add event listener register a single event listener on a single target, okay? The event target may be a single element in the document itself, and blah, blah, blah. In this case, we're working with the document itself. So what we're saying? We're saying that we're going to wait for an event happen, and after this event happen, we're going to start working with our JavaScript in here, okay? So the thing that is our event is going to be called as DOM content loaded, okay? I know it seems confusing, it's a lot of new information, but this is the type. This notation here explains to the compiler that we have to wait the page loads first, to then after loading the page, we're going to work with the JavaScript, okay? So let's do this. So we put this in here, and we're going to create a function, okay? And let me do this in here. And we're going to create a function. And everything that we're going to write in our JavaScript is going to be inside this function here, okay? So for example, let's run our code again. So it's passing an error. So he's having some troubles. Let me check. So let's save it and let's try in here. So let's do again. Let's refresh. So it's missing after an argument list. Let me put in here. Deixa eu colocar aqui 22.000. So we have this in here. I miswrote here, so it's function, okay? and it's here we have to put inside the quotation marks, okay? And now if we run our code, so let's do here a refresh, we're going to check what? That the problem is not appearing anymore, so it's showing up here, the H1. So now the problem understands, so if you check, here we wait the project to run, the HTML part to load, and then we're going to do the JavaScript part. So if we take out this, let me take this out. So if we take out this, let me make this the right indentation, okay? And if we save and we do this a refresh, it's going to appear null, okay? Because the project doesn't understand what it's H1, because it's doing the JavaScript part before the HTML is set in here. That's why we have to use the add event listener. So when we use the add event listener here, so let's do this again. Now, so this is when we are not using the add event listener, it's showing up here no. But when we use the add event listener, now it's going to show to us what is the H1, okay? So the add event listener is basically this. It's going to wait an event to happen, and when this event happened, everything that is inside here in this curly brackets here, it's going to work, okay? So that's why we're using, now we can see the console.log of the H1. So we're grabbing the H1 and we have to grab the body, okay, to change the background. So actually let's just first grab the H1. So now what we're going to do, so let's start our project working with the welcome button. And what the welcome button was doing was just saying hello you for us, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to create here a document. So we're going to grab again, we're going to use the query selector. So this is the welcome button, okay? So when the welcome button is clicked, this will happen, okay? And how are we going to grab the welcome button? We're going to use the document query selector with the ID button, as we already saw previously. So we're going to say here document.query selector, and inside we're going to use single quotation marks, hash, and welcome, okay? But now we want to check the event where the button is clicked. And this event we can call by we can put here .onClick event double3schools. Double3schools is a really good documentation. Okay, they explain a lot of things for us in JavaScript, HTML, and all of this. You can take a look later. But what the onClick event does, the onClick event occurs when the user clicks on an element. So in here, we're saying what? So when the document, so when this ID here, welcome, and what this ID welcome means, this query selector is going to grab this button. So when this button is clicked, so we're going to use the .onClick, okay? What we want to have, we're going to have this function here, okay? And what we want to have when we click on the welcome button. So when we click on the welcome button, we want to display the H1 here. We just want to display the H1 when we click on the welcome button. If we don't have the welcome button open, we don't want to show this in here. I'm going to open up again new terminal. I'm going to do cd JavaScript, and I'm going to do HTTP server just to check what we want to our project, okay? So we want our project to start with anything here, and just when we click the button, we want to appear here the hello you. By now our project is appearing the hello you as default, and we don't want this. So we're going to say what? So when we click on this button with ID welcome, okay, this welcome button, we want to have what? We want to say hello you, okay? And how are we going to do this? We're going to use this inner.html. And what this inner.html does? The inner.html property sets or returns the HTML content of an element. So you understand it's going to return the HTML content of an element. If we use inner HTML, we're going to return the element that we want. And we already created the element here. It's our h1. So that's what we're going to do in here. So we're going to call the h1.inner HTML. It's equals to what? It's going to be equals to hello you. Okay? And that's what is going to happen. So as we can see here, when we refresh, when we open the page, there's nothing, but when we click here, it's going to open up the hello you. And in our project by now, it's showing up the hello you at any case, but we want to show this hello you just when we clicked on the welcome. Okay, so we're going to work on this now. So let's do HTTP server and let's check what happens. So let's refresh here. Okay, and when we click here, it's appearing hello you. Okay, so it's appearing hello you. So this button is working. Let's see this again. Now the default case, the U, it's in all lowercase, but when we click the button, it's showing hello you with here capitalized. Why? Because we put here hello you. Okay, so by now our button is working, but how are we going to have the default case with nothing? We're going to take the message that we had before. Okay, so we're going to take this out, and when we run this again, now what we're going to have, we're going to have just the buttons, okay, when we open up the page, and just when we click on welcome, it's going to show hello you. So far so good, it's working our project. Okay, so this welcome button, we're almost done. So now let's go to the next problem. So now it's when the red button is clicked. Okay, now it's the situation, the scenario when the red button is clicked. And what we're going to do, so here, when we click, let me open up here the terminal again. So when we open up here, when we click on the red, it's going to change all the background of our project, okay? So it's going to change all the body. So here we have to do the query selector to grab the body. So let's do the same thing as we did on the H1. And I'm going to use the debugger, the developer's tool, so you can understand. So if we do here document.query selector and we put here body, what is going to show up to us? It's going to show what? All of this, okay? And it's showing for us now the color is red, okay? So check this out, the color of our body is red, but when we click green and we do the document.query selector, now the background changed the color to green. And it's all in the body tag, okay? And if we change the color to blue and we call again the document.query selector body, change the background color of the body to blue. So we're going to use the body tag here to change the background when we click on the button. So that's what we're going to do. So here we're going to define the body, okay? And we're going to use the document.query selector, and we're going to grab the body tag, okay? So after we're grabbing the body tag, what do we want to do? We want to do the same idea as we did in here. We're going to grab our red button. So in here we use the welcome, but we're going to use the red button in here because this is the name of our red button. And when we click on this button, something is going to happen. So let's do this in here. So document.query selector. Here we're going to use #red. Why #red? Because we're grabbing the ID of this button. And we're going to do .onClick, okay? So here, this part we're saying, when we click on the button red, now we're going to explain what is going to happen inside. So what we're going to do inside, we're going to change the background color, okay? That's what we're doing on these three buttons here. So how are we going to change the background color? There is a property called style.backgroundColor in JavaScript, okay, and we're going to use this property here. So we're going to write body.style.backgroundColor, and we're going to set here as red, right? Because when we click on the button written red, we want to change the body to red. So let's check in our project. Let me open up here the server again. Let me run. And what do we have? So when we click on red, nothing is happened. And let's check why. So I think I miswrote in here. So style.backgroundColor equals to. Okay, so let's check why it's not working. Let me refresh. Actually, I forgot to do a hard refresh. So when we click red, so what's happening? The onClick is not a function. Let me check what I did here. So onClick I am using here, that's the problem. We shouldn't use the parentheses. We have to do the same way as we did in here. I just use the parentheses because they click on the suggestion of CS15 that give us a mistake. So in here in the console we have any error, so when we click red, it's going to change the background all to red. Okay, so far so good. The next two buttons we're going to do the same, but instead of clicking here, we're going to create a green, and when we click here, it's going to create a blue. So you see that when we click here, nothing's happening because we didn't set any command to these two buttons. We just set command to these two buttons in here. Okay, so let's do for the next button. So when the green button is clicked, and what it's going to do, we're going to do the same idea. So we're going to use document.querySelector, and we're going to grab the green button, okay, because the idea of the green button is green, and we're going to use the onClick. It's equals to function. And what is the function in here? We're going to do the same thing. So body, why body? Body, we're grabbing here this variable body where we are storing the body from the HTML, okay? So we're going to do body style.backgroundColor. And what's going to be the background color now? It's going to be green, right? Because when we click green, we want to make this green. So let's see how it goes. Let's do a hard refresh. So it's doing this in here. Let's wait a second. Let me do this again. So it couldn't reach. Why? What's the problem? Let's check. So no problems. My computer is crazy. So when we click red here, it's appearing the background red, and when we click here, it's appearing the background green. So now let's do the last button, right? Because when we click blue, it keeps being the color that it was before. So now let's work with the blue button. So when the blue button is clicked, what we're going to do, document.querySelector. Here it's going to be what? Blue. When we click, so on click, we're going to do what? Function. And we're going to do body.style.backgroundColor. And now we want to set this as blue, right? Oops, blue. So let's refresh our project and let's see if the buttons are working. So when we click red is red, and when we click green is green, and when we click blue is blue. So it's working, we're giving the right background colors to each button, okay? But now if we take a look, let's take a look in here. So let me open up the other server, our final project. So when we open up here, what do we have? When we click on the welcome button, it appears a background in white and the word hello you. When we click on the red, just appears here the background in red. When we click here in gray, it appears just the background without the heading. And the blue, the same idea, it appears just the background without the heading. And let's try if our code makes the same logic as the final project here. So let's see if we have any bugs in what we want to reach in the end. So when we click the welcome, it's appearing here in a white background and just the heading. When we click on the red, we have the red background, but we still have here the heading. But we don't want this, right? We want to appear just the background without the heading. So we have to fix this. Let's check the green. The green occurs the same. We shouldn't have this H1. The blue shouldn't have this H1, right? And let's come back to welcome. And when we click to welcome, we don't have the background in white. So we have to fix these two problems. The first problem is what? Let me just refresh in here. So the first problem is what? When we click on welcome and then we click on any color button, we don't take out this hello thing here, right? So we have to work with this on our code. So if you check on the welcome button, we use this H1 inner to set the H1 message as hello you. So we have to take this message when we click on the other button. How are we going to do this? We're going to do the same trick. So we're going to use H1 inner HTML. It's equals to, but now we don't want to have anything written, right? But in this case we have hello you. So we're going to pass here an empty string. Okay, so we're going to set this as empty. So let's check what happens. So let's do a hard refresh. When we click on welcome, it's showing just the welcome here, and when we click on red, it's just appearing in the background. And why we're able to do this? Because we create here, we set that the H1 here should be empty. It doesn't have to have a message. Okay, that's what we're doing here. So for example, if we click on welcome and we click on green, it's also appearing the heading. Why? Because we're not explaining to do this to make an empty string in the H1. So we're going to pass this to the other color variables. So H1 inner HTML, we're going to set here as empty, inner HTML, and the other color button we're going to do the same. So h1.inner HTML, and we're going to set this as empty. Okay, so let's check if this is working. So let's do a hard refresh. When we click on welcome and we click on red, just appear the background. Great, so it's working. When we click on welcome and we click on green, it's just appearing the background. Perfect. When we click on welcome and when we click on blue, it's just appearing the background. Perfect. But we still have one more thing that we're missing. That is what? Let me open up the final project here. So what's happening? Our color buttons are working fine, but when we are clicking the welcome button, so we're here, and when we click the welcome button, our background should become white again, just with the heading. So the heading plus the white background. But in our project, what we're having here, let me open up the terminal again. In our project, what we're having here, when we click welcome and we click on the button, okay, it's changing, but when we click on welcome again, it's not changing to the background in white as it should be. So we have to fix this problem. The same way as in here, we create an H1 inner HTML as empty. Now we have to create here a style.background color and set this to white. So that's what we're going to do in here. Okay, body.style.background color equals to white. Okay, so now let's check if it's working. So when we click on welcome, it's appearing the heading. When we click on red, it's appearing the background. When we click on green, it's appearing the background. When we click on blue, we have the background. And let's come back to welcome. So when we click welcome, it comes back being a white background with the word here in hello. So far so good. Our JavaScript code, it's all perfect. Now we just have to finish our project doing one more thing. That is what? To make this style, right? Because this project here looks much more fancier than this. So how are we going to do this? We're going to do some steps. And the first thing that we're going to do is what? We're going to create styles.css. Okay, so we're going to do some things with CSS. So create here styles.css and put in the same folder as the other two files that you have. And to use this styles.css, we have to do the same thing as we did with the index.js. We have to insert in the head part a link to say what? Go to styles.css to get the style. So we have to put in here a link, href equals to. Now the name of the file is styles.css. And then we have to put rel equals to style sheet. And then we have to close here. Okay, so this way we are making this relationship between index.html and styles.css. Now we're going to do what? The first thing that we're going to do is to make, if you check here the project, the heading is in yellow. So let's start changing the color of the heading, okay? So since the heading is something unique in this project, we're going to call here as h1, okay? And we're going to set color to yellow. And let's save it. Now let's check how it appears in our project. So when we click welcome, we have this yellow here, but this is yellow, it's not so good as this yellow here, right? So instead of just writing yellow, we can use something here. You can check on Google, but we have a lot of colors. We can use a lot of colors like we can use in the real world. So for example, if you want to use a color like gold in here, we can use this hex code and we can just copy this, okay? That's what I did. So copy this hex code, okay? And paste it instead of the word yellow. And let's save. When you refresh here, we're going to have the heading with color gold, okay? So you can use or this, or you can copy this RGB blah blah blah, and you can put after the color here. And you're going to have the same color when we refresh the page, okay? It's the same color. You can use both of these notations, okay? Now we change the color, but we can do something more. We can, if we check in here, the message is aligned in the center of the page, okay? So it's in the center of the page. If we check our project, it's all in the left side, right? So let's do this center align. And the center align, it's a property that text align actually. It's a property that we have in CSS. So for example, if we put here CSS text align, we can use the CSS text align in double three schools. Okay, so double three schools has a good documentation, and we can check difference between each example. So this is text align property. So when we use text align center, we have the text align in the center, text align in the left, we have the text align in the left, text align in right, text align justified, okay? So we have a couple of examples. But in this case, since here we have in the middle, we're going to use the text align in the center, okay? So we're going to write in here, in our styles.css, text align. Here we're going to put center, okay? And let's save it. Now let's run. And when we click on the welcome button, it appears here on the center, okay? So it's almost perfect, their heading. We're going to keep doing this later. Let's come back to the buttons. So we're checking here, the buttons are really powerful. They are really nice to see, right? But when we check here, it's so, I don't know. It's not funny when we check this one. Here we say, oh, it's fancy. This person had a really great job doing this. And this one we kept, oh, this seems like a page of 2000 or before 2000. So let's use, in this case, instead of using the styles.css, we can use something that it's called Bootstrap, okay? And Bootstrap, it's a documentation that already has a lot of templates that we can use. So how do we use the Bootstrap? We have to do the same thing as we did in here with the styles.css. So you write here getbootstrap.com and you go to what? We click on docs. okay? And here they give an introduction, they explain a little how to use it, but basically you have to copy and paste the style sheet link into your head before all the style sheets to load our CSS. So we're going to copy and we're going to paste this in here to use in our project, okay? You just need to copy and paste. And why this is powerful? Because when we do this copy and paste, we are able to use a lot of things in here. So you can use, for example, content components. We can create alerts, buttons, cards, cursive, close button. We can create a lot of things that are already made for us. And one of these examples are the buttons, okay? We can use buttons. So we can use these button styles, and we have more here, just using the bootstrap. So for example, here we have our red button, okay? This red button here. So it's nice if we use a button that has in here, it's not a nice style of button, but here we can use this red button here. And how are we going to grab this red button? So let's check, we're going to use this danger. So let's check the danger. We keep here, so danger. And we're going to grab this class here, class btn hyphen danger. So you're going to copy this and you're going to paste this inside of your button tag. You can paste this in here. And if you check, it's appearing here, the button in red, okay? So it's a really nice thing, nice tool to use. We can do this for the other, so we can use blue we can use this primary for the blue, so copy this class btn primary and paste this on the blue button, okay? And we can do the same for the green, so grab here the success and paste it in here, okay? And we have here, if we refresh, we have here these colors. I use the yellow in the welcome, so we can grab this warning, for example, this warning class for the yellow. And we're going to paste this in here. And let's refresh, and what do we have in here? We have the buttons, okay? When we click, it appears here, hello you, the red, the green, the blue. But it's not the same way as we're seeing here, because why? Our buttons are in the middle, right? So let's put the buttons in the middle of the project. And how are we going to do this? So here we're going to create a div, okay? A div tag. And we're going to insert the buttons inside this div tag. So paste the buttons inside our div tag and make the style look nice, okay? The right indentation. And what we're going to do in this div. So div is a tag that is going to make all of this in the same line in here, okay? So div separates the content in the HTML in blocks. So that's why we're creating this div. And why are we using this div? Because we want to make the content justified on the center. And we can use something in the flex box that it's called here, flex. So you click on flex, okay, utilities, flex, and you're going to see a lot of explanation. And the most powerful one that we're going to use is this deflex justify content center. So we're going to grab this. Why? This is the third example here. So we're going to grab this in here. And what is this going to do? It's going to make all the content justified in the center. So we're going to paste this in here in the div. So let's save and let's check. So by now our buttons are in here. And when we do a refresh, now our buttons, it's going to be where? my computer is so slowly. So when we do a refresh, let's wait, now it's in the center, okay? So it's basically the same idea, it's in the center as the others. And when we click here, it seems very... so now we can change a little more few things. And now it's the last thing that we're going to do. So if we check here, it's all too close to each other, right? The buttons are close to the top of the page, and the hello, it's really close to the button. But in here we have some space. And how are we going to do this? We're going to use something that is called margin top property on CSS. This CSS we can create a styles.css, but we can write the style inside the tag here. So we can create a style equals to what? Double quotation mark. I'm going to write margin top, and I'm going to put here 50 pixels. It's the same thing as we did in here, but we can write inside of the tag, okay? It's up to you to decide. So when we do a refresh in here, now we can check that we have this margin top, okay? So if you want to get the solution to this project and also an ebook on how to become a developer, get the description below, okay? I hope you enjoyed this content and see you in the next video. Bye bye.